Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined as always by our producer, Rachel Boyd. On this program, we visit with the people who have shaped the history, culture, and character of our region. We focus on their accomplishments, the lessons they've learned, and the values that guided their journey so that future generations might find inspiration in their stories. Today, we begin a special two-part conversation with former Lubbock Mayor Allen Henry, a businessman, public servant, and civic leader whose influence has been felt across Lubbock for decades. Allen served on the city council and later as mayor, helping guide the city through a period of growth and change. His name is permanently associated with Lake Allen Henry, a critical long-term water resource for the South Plains. In this first episode, we'll talk about Allen's early life in Lubbock, his education, and the experiences that prepared him for public service. Allen, welcome back to Archive West Texas.
Thank you very much, Gordon.
Should point out to our listeners that earlier this season, Allen was gracious enough to spend a good bit of time sharing a broad and deep perspective on Congressman George Mahon. And thank you for taking time to do that. You've got a great story in and of itself regarding your commitment to this community, and that's what we're here to focus on today. You spent most of your life in and around Lubbock. Were you born here? How did your family get to Lubbock?
Well, there's two different questions. Yes, I was born here. The classic song was A Boy from Texas, a Girl from Tennessee, which you don't remember. But my family migrated here during the Depression from western Tennessee, and my dad moved to Slayton from East Texas, from a little small town of Whitewright. So I was born in Lubbock and have virtually been here all my life.
What did your parents do?
My father started out, well, first of all, he and his two brothers worked a farm just south of Slayton, which was probably the hardest job he ever had. But he had various jobs. During the Depression, he worked for Foxworth Galbraith Lumber Company. Most of his time was spent working for the Plains Co-op oil mill. At that time, it was the largest oil mill in the world, and he was in the office department there. My mom was, as everyone was, she stayed home with me, just the three of us, until my younger brother came along 4 years later.
Where did you live?
All right, we lived 1916 28th Street. The house is still there in good condition. My folks built that house in 1939, and so I lived there nearly all my life.
What was Lubbock like in those early days? Or what do you remember about the community as you were growing up?
Well, let me give you a little context. I grew up my early days were during World War II. And so usually when I hear an old person like me talking, I'll spend a little time trying to figure out how old they are. So I'll just tell you I was born December 4th, 1941.
3 days before Pearl Harbor, am I right?
That's very good of you to remember. My mother used to joke, and she said that she and I were in the hospital room, and she was listening to the reports of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor when I was 3 days old. She said the reason they attacked was because they found out about me, but it took them 3 days to hear about it. I appreciated that confidence that she had in.
Now, I've read a little bit of Lubbock history, not a bunch. Am I right that in the 40s and 50s that this community was voted the cleanest community in the state several times?
I think that is correct. I'm not sure exactly how that all came about.
In your childhood, what's the southern boundary of town and the western boundary of town?
Oh, that would be 34th Street. And I'd say mostly 34th. I was just off Avenue Q. If you remember the old Spears Furniture Company, which had been at 28th and Q, I was just a block
west of there.
But the city, you have to remember that the city of Lubbock was only founded in 1909. So from there to the early 40s was
40 years old, pretty young town too.
Well, correct. So. Well, actually, it was less than 40 years old. It was 09 to 40.
Yeah, 31 years.
31 years old. So if you think about just 31 years back in your life and everybody's life and think that's the beginning of a city, the fact that it was, by the time I came along in World War II, it had 31,000 people in it. By the end of World War II, it had 71,000 people. It had more than doubled.
And just those 4 years or 5 years?
I'm sorry. It was in that decade.
Okay.
From 40 to
50.
50. Okay. It grew a great deal because of the Air Force Base that opened, once again, by our friend George Mahon at Lubbock Army Airfield. There were actually 2 training fields in Lubbock. And so during the war, that was what attracted a lot of people, plus the glider installation out north of town. So it grew tremendously. But as a small boy, of course, I didn't see any of that. At that time, everybody had 1 car or less. And so you depended on where you could go on the bus, or a little bit later where you could ride on a bicycle. So your world was defined by your transportation mode. And so as a young boy, we didn't see a whole lot of the growth.
What schools did you attend? And did you have any?
I attended Dupree Elementary, which is 22nd Avenue T, just south of Lubbock High. And it was fairly new at that time and one of the larger ones. And then I went to O.L. Slayton Junior High. It was fairly new also at that time. And
almost right across the street.
It's being torn down now. And, of course, Dupree Elementary was phased out as a school a number of years ago. And then Lubbock High, and then Texas Tech.
Were there any teachers that you remember that made a special impression on you or encouraged you?
Yes, for some reason, my second grade teacher at Dupree, Jewel Foster, was very memorable. She had a wonderful way of working and understanding us. For some reason, I remember that she told us on the first day of school that her husband had been killed in World War II, just a few years prior to that. And for whatever reason, Jewel Foster was somebody that I remembered for a long time.
What activities or interests filled your time as a young boy?
Well, basically, I grew up in an interesting neighborhood in that there were not a lot of young kids my age. As a matter of fact, in our block areas there was nobody within, just one person that was within 5 years of me. Everybody else was that much older. Well, first of all, they were nice to me, and it was a little awkward, but it didn't bother me. But I'd knock on the door and say, "Can Billy come out and play?" Well, Billy was 18 and I was 6, but that's okay. Yeah, you know, what I did, I learned how to improvise and how to deal with a situation at the moment.
Looking back, what did Lubbock give you as a place to grow up that shaped who you became?
I think it gave us a sense of security. We felt like that we were more or less insulated from many of the things that are happening in the world from the war. The crime was low, and I think it was like so many other small towns that everybody knew each other, and that was sometimes I was good, sometimes I was bad, but it provided a safe, secure place to grow up for people like me.
There you go. Let's talk a little bit about your education at Lubbock High and at Texas Tech. You graduated from Lubbock High School in 1960. What stands out to you about your years there?
Well, when I entered Lubbock High in 1957, Monterey High School was only 2 years old. So up until that time, and prior to that 2-year period, Lubbock High was it. It was one of the largest schools anywhere, most successful athletically. And then
they won a couple of state football championships.
Won state football championships. So it had a rich history. And still does. Enjoyed that building very, very much. But by the time I got there in our class, Monterey had been built. And of course, there was a huge exodus from Lubbock High. Among those that exited, of course, were our athletes. And so we fell on hard times, but we had some really outstanding people in my class. Now, one of them was Ralna English. You may or may not remember Ralna.
She was on the Lawrence Wilk show. My grandmother was a huge fan of Ralna English.
People my age will remember a lot about Ralna English. And she and I started out in the 6th grade orchestra together. One of my claims to fame at Dewberry Elementary was I played a duet with Ralna English.
What did you play?
I played the violin. She did too. Well, she played the violin. I followed along. Let's put it that way. We had Royal Ferguson, who became a federal judge, was our class president. We were just a couple of years behind Buddy Holly, and so we had a lot of interesting, important folks. And to me, it's interesting that to this day, we still have a fairly substantial list of email folks that we correspond back and forth, even though it's been well over 60 years. As an aside, it's interesting, most of these people that I'm emailing, I still remember from high school. And so there were 2 or 3 who were big men on campus and big football players, and it just seems odd when one of those will say, "Does anybody know the best Medicare supplement?" so you just say, "Well, okay, that's life."
So you went from Lubbock High to Tech. What made you decide to stay local for college?
Well, it was not a matter of deciding. It was just more of a natural progression, and economics probably more than anything else. At that time, going to college was not just an assured thing like it is today. So the fact that Texas Tech was here and my folks had a home for me to come to at night, that just seemed to work out well.
Did you have a sense of what you wanted to do professionally when you entered college?
To be honest, I did not. What I did when I entered college, my dad gave me some very good advice. He said, if you're not sure what you want to do, major in business, because it doesn't matter what you do, you'll need to know what a balance sheet is, and you'll need to know whether your checking account is overdrawn, and you'll need to be able to make management decisions. So that has held up well for me as I ended up in the insurance business.
What was Texas Tech like at that time?
Well, it was small. I think
it was actually a college at that time, and university was College Avenue. Am I right about that?
It was Texas Technological College. In fact, one of the major issues that came up when I was a freshman, maybe a sophomore, there was a strong effort to rename Texas Tech Texas State University, because the state university is generally the land-grant college of the state, but which would have been Texas A&M. Well, Texas A&M said, no, we're going to continue to be Texas A&M. So if somebody else wants to be Texas State, that'd be good. Well, there was a large number of people, students and some graduates, that felt like that Texas State University would be more prestigious, be much easier to sell as a multipurpose university. However, the governor at that time was Preston Smith, and Preston's folks felt like that was really a bad idea. So that didn't go very far.
That worked out okay, I guess. Ultimately,
it worked out.
Became a Texas State at, what was that, San Marcos?
Yes, they finally ended up taking it. Absolutely. But Texas Tech at that point, you did all the things that you see in the old movies. We had freshman beanies, green beanies. Everybody had to have one of them. There
green? Why would they be green?
They were lime green, and you were called a slime.
Okay.
Yes, all incidentally, right. There's a lot of things you just don't need to know about that.
Slime. I've heard of slime caps.
In fact, most of the sophomores, upperclassmen would probably be in jail now because one of the things you got to do was push a penny with your nose, and you got to do a few things like that. Now, that was in junior high and high school. You got to know everybody, and as I mentioned a minute ago, that wasn't necessarily good.
What was the genesis of your interest in politics? Were you in student government at Lubbock High?
I was not really active in student government, a couple or three offices. I really became interested in government and politics through an interesting way, and that was that at that time, the Chamber of Commerce had the Community Ambassador Program, and we may have talked about this before.
Touched on that briefly last time.
And I was selected to do that, which sent me to Argentina for a summer. And I learned an awful lot about what went on in a government, what went on in other places. Then when I graduated back to Lubbock High, I was a commencement speaker. I was in the debate class and was invited to be the commencement speaker. Well, that was the biggest deal I ever heard of. We had a completely full auditorium, and so I gave my speech, and I kind of enjoyed it. And one thing just sort of led to another.
That's interesting. I think foreign travel often gives one a deeper appreciation for what we have here.
Oh, it does. It does.
America.
I went to Argentina. Well, that was only about 6 years after Juan Perón, the dictator, was overthrown. And so there was real bitterness in Argentina because some of them were Peronistas, and they were bitter because their guy had been thrown out, and the others thought it was a good idea. But I remember they had the Casa Rosada, which is a pink house because it's made out of pink granite, which is the same as our White House. Well, that still had major bullet holes in the front of that building, and it kind of reminds you, hey, this peaceful transfer of power is not something you ought to take for granted.
One other question I had on your education at Tech, did you have any professors that meant a lot to you?
Yes, one in particular, his name was Vince Lusinger. Dr. Lusinger, actually there were two. His wife, Louise Lusinger, was a marketing professor. Vince Lusinger was a professor of management. And at the time that I was in school working on my general management degree, there was not a master's program for management. There was a master's of business administration, but at that time, there were not so many of the specialties. So when I graduated from Texas Tech and was looking at the possibility of going somewhere for a master's, Lusinger said, hey, and he talked to 3 or 4 of us and said, how would you like to help me start a master's in business management program here? And we thought that'd be good. And so it was really interesting. There were probably 25 of us that were in that first class. But Dr. Lusinger would do most of the lecturing, but then he would bring in guests, and we helped him put it together. And so now it's one of the real primary business administration subspecialties.
You were there at the start of that. So
that's right.
That's good. We did an in-depth program on your time in Washington earlier this season, but give our listeners a synopsis of the opportunity you had to work with Congressman Mahon and how that shaped and formed your views of government.
Sure. As I mentioned before, I had accepted a job tentatively in Corpus Christi with Pittsburgh Plate Glass. And I had interviewed with Mr. Mahon at the suggestion of Gene Jenkins, who was the director of our placement service here. He had asked Gene if she knew of a guy that would be graduating that might work out. And she knew of my civic involvement there at Texas Tech. She suggested me, which is one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to me. So one morning, Mr. Mahon called me about 7 o'clock in the morning and said, Alan, would you like to come to Washington and work for me? And so it took me very little time to say, yes, yes, sir, that would be great. So I did stay here for a couple of more months and finish out the master's. But at that time, then drove up to Washington and
Drove to Washington.
Then we drove up to Washington, D.C.
You had an outstanding couple of years in Washington with
Yes.
Congressman Mahon.
Right.
And then you returned to Lubbock and actually started teaching management at Tech. What drew you to teaching?
Well, here's the way it happened. I came back. We talk about fate and how things, it doesn't matter how you plan your life is going to not go the direction you have in mind necessarily. I felt sure that I would want to stay in Washington for a long time and was really enjoying what we're doing. Sandy and I, my wife, were just about to get married. So just about that time, my father, who had a small insurance agency here, developed cancer. And so he passed away just 2 weeks after we were married. So I was in Washington. My brother was too young to do much, and so I decided, well, I need to go back and see what we can do with that insurance agency. And it was one of those deals. I came back to see what to do with the insurance agency, and 60 years later, I'm still wondering what to do with the insurance agency. So
It worked out all right, I guess.
So we came back, and I had my license already. And amazing things happened. My mother had never been involved at all, but she and my dad's secretary kept the agency going for several months until I got back. And so,
how did your father migrate from Plains Cotton Oil Mill to the insurance business?
Well, this was all as a result of the opportunities after World War II. You know, there were a lot of people that wanted to do different things, but were afraid to make a move during the war. But he was one of very many who he had run into situations with insurance companies, commercial insurance primarily at the oil mill. And some of those folks had suggested he might want to try the insurance business. So I admired him every day. It's something that could hardly be done at all today, just to start out with nothing and start selling home and auto policies. But he had had that for a good while and had developed a nice one-person business by the time that I got involved. And so when I got involved, then, of course, we expanded and we purchased some other agencies, and we've been lucky and had great people working with us. And so it's been a wonderful deal. So our son, Ryan, is now in the agency. He's been there about 10 years, so he's third generation.
That is. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, as they say.
That's right.
Tell us about Sandy. Where did you all meet?
Well, Sandy and I actually met at Texas Tech. Sandy's father was a major in the Air Force. He was a command B-29 pilot in World War II, and then he piloted B-36s in the Korean War. And so she had lived all over, and prior to moving to Lubbock, had lived on the island of Guam. And she spent most of her high school years in Guam. So when she came here, she was already a senior in high school. And we met at the Baptist Student Union at Lubbock, Texas. And we began dating. That was when I was working up in Washington. And so I was down here only occasionally, but she finished up her degree and became a teacher and taught at Coronado High School, taught French for 3 or 4 years until Ryan came along.
There you go.
And I have to say, Ann started the science spectrum in our basement, which has been her life for the last 30 years.
We would really like to get her on for an episode to talk about that.
You need to talk to her about that. It's an amazing story.
So you come back to see what you can do with the insurance agency, but you also did teach some at Tech. Tell us that story.
At the time that I was beginning the agency, I really didn't have full-time agency work. So Dr. Lusinger knew I was back in town, he said, "Alan, I've got a couple of freshman level courses that I'd like you to teach in the principles of management." And so I did that as a part-time instructor for about 2 years. It was really very interesting working with the young folks who had all the answers that they thought, but it was one of those things that worked out really well with my career, and the fact that I was able to be a part-time instructor, I was very helpful economically also.
Looking back at your experiences at Lubbock High, Texas Tech, with Congressman Mahon, teaching at Tech, seeing what you could do with the insurance agency, how did all of those early career experiences prepare you for the public roles that would come later?
Well, all of those involved commitment to the community. All of them involved what's going on around you. In Lubbock, it was an especially interesting time that made me very interested in public service. Probably the thing that had happened that changed Lubbock more than anything else was the tornado of 1970. And the tornado of 1970, even though it's only happened once in the history of Lubbock, changed the character of the city more than anything else that I can think of. Not the damage that was done, but it changed the attitude of people. It changed the way planning was done. It changed so many aspects of the city. And I could see this was happening because I had been selected to be the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I could see the growth that was taking place. And so I just became very interested in Lubbock and thinking about the other cities that I'd lived in, being in Washington. I just felt like this is something I'd really like to take on as a challenge.
We're going to explore that a little bit more in our next episode. Alan, thank you for taking time today to share your background and your educational experiences. And we appreciate you sticking with us for one more segment where we'll talk more specifically about your service to the city of Lubbock. Thank you for listening today. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Please join us again next week for another edition of Archive West Texas.